because I have something to share with you this evening. Don't worry, I wrote it all out. So let me give my apologies up front. And I have none, okay? So no apologies. Except for the fact that if I read a little bit, just forgive me for that. But this is probably the most uncomfortable thing I've ever done, so thank you for that. I will say that I think I narrowed down my biggest problem, that is to try and be funny. So from this point on, I'm not saying I'm always successful, but I will no longer try and be funny from this point on. Thank you, yes. So, let me get some water. So, an interesting thing happened to the church over the course of its history. And it could have been because it was trying to mimic the industry that it saw around it. And resemble corporations or trying to reproduce mass production. The churches started to get really, really big. Certainly not all the outcomes of this, churches growing and getting big, are negative. But for tonight, the one I'd like to focus on is them growing and causing us to see the world through a different filter than I think we're supposed to. The church needed to communicate a biblical lifestyle, but they needed to do it in a one-size-fits-all kind of way because of the mass amount of people they were trying to communicate with. And as many of us know, the easiest way to accomplish mass communication is through a list of standards or rules or regulations. Now, before I say that, and before we get too far down the path of kind of what's popular right now, I'm not here tonight to tell you that rules are stupid. I'm not here to talk about how religion is stupid. That's kind of a different conversation. So there's like that whole I love Jesus, I don't love the church. And so that's not what we're talking about tonight, because I think that's a whole different conversation. But people that know me know that I do not like rules. I do not like authority. And it's more authority that I feel like has not been earned, or people that try and have authority over me that I feel like don't necessarily care what happens after I do what they say. It's not for my good that they're telling me what to do. But I don't want to pretend like I always have it right, and my anti-authoritarianism is always righteous. But I think through self-reflection, I found out that I don't like rules because I feel like I want to accomplish the end goal on my own. I don't know if anybody else feels like that. But if you tell me, say, here's a small example, which this does not happen, but at home, if Leah, my wife, says, hey, have the house clean before I get home, I will probably do it, and I will hate every second of it. But I do my best to do that whenever possible. And the reason I don't like the fact that she told me is because in my own weird head, I assume that the reason she's telling me is because she feels like I can't accomplish that on my own. So you know what I'm saying? That is kind of my basis for why I don't like rules. And a lot of other reasons. Sometimes it's just me being stupid and just hard-headed. But I think most of the time it comes back to that. Lost my place already. Good. So I truly want to do what is good at all times. And if you walk me down the path to goodness, I know it won't mean as much to you as if I can find the path on my own or as an act of service to you in some way. So the more we operate on rules, the more we become like robots. I believe God created us as humans, not computer programs made to execute a list of tasks until our time runs out, and we're retired into the Hall of Fame as a machine that executed our tasks most efficiently, and we hear the words that we have all competed for, well done, good and faithful machine. I'm not suggesting that we have too many rules, and so we need to throw them all out. At some point, almost all rules or guidelines had a noble purpose, and setting standards is phenomenally important to personal character and development. I'm saying this entire system of religion or church or whatever you want to call it is flawed, and rules are never enough. I'm saying that when we live by rules, we end up basing our lives on living just above the lowest standard, and that's not really living. Combating the negative is not the same as living in the positive. preventing death is not the same thing as living. I think physical health provides us a good example as far as this goes, but if you have a fatal disease like cancer, perhaps, maybe all you can focus on is fighting that death. And that's okay. I'm not saying that's wrong at all. But if you're physically healthy, it'd be a really bad idea to take chemotherapy to try and ward off cancer. And I think in the church that we do that too often. We search for things that are wrong with us. We're conditioned to look for the things that are bad. And then we just keep, when we fix that one, we move on to the next one. And I'm saying that that filter's a little bit off, or completely wrong, let's just say that. The ironic part of all of that is when you get, well, like somebody said, if you get busy living, or if you get to work living the most abundant life you can in Christ, I think death is not even a thought. So let's say, for tonight's purposes, we're going to refer to sin as death, because we know that's the case. And when you're busy living the way you're supposed to live, I think that death is an afterthought. I think you can move beyond figuring out ways to prevent death all the time. So this kind of came for me in the middle of college. I was really busy not having sex and not drinking and not smoking and not swearing and not being unevenly yoked, but I was sitting around with nothing to do. I had a bunch of stuff not to do. So I'm sitting around thinking, this cannot possibly be what this is all about. I have nothing to do except not do things. Apparently, some of you feel like that a little bit too. So I was conditioned to look for the things to keep out of my life, and I was not seeking what I should do, or I was just like, what do I do? We know that sin leads to death, but what leads to life? Now, this may be depressing. If you have been in church for a long time, you may know what I'm talking about, and I would encourage you not to blame people for that. I would also, if you haven't been in church, maybe that's why you haven't been in church, because that's your perception. But let's just move on from that, because I have good news. We don't have to live in that. A good person perhaps to go to would be Jesus, and he says something as he's about to leave his disciples. Because in the Bible, we're not the first people to face this problem. In the Bible, it happens over and over and over again. People set up this weird list of regulations that they think are going to help them be closer to God. And at first it does, and then they just rely on that, and they're not paying any attention to God anymore. They are running life on their own because we're good. We made up our own regulations, we're good. And I think some of what Jesus says is a response to that. But he says this. So this is John chapter 13. This is verses 31 through 35. And like I said, this is toward the end, kind of. He's about to be taken away in just a little bit. So it's some of the last stuff that he says. And it says this. When he'd gone out, Jesus said, "Now the Son of Man has been glorified, and God has been glorified in him. If God has been glorified in him, God will also glorify him in himself, and will glorify him at once. Little children, I am with you only a little longer. You will look for me. And as I said to the Jews, so now I say to you, where I'm going, you cannot come. I give you a new commandment, that you love one another, just as I have loved you. You should also love one another. But by this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another."